Hey guys, it's macj here. Welcome to another video, and in this video I would like to talk about mastering lo-fi beats. So what is mastering exactly? There's a lot of definitions of what mastering really is, but in my understanding, it is a process of mixing your track as a whole. And the main issue I see with this step in beat production is I see that a lot of people overdo this. And mastering usually, in most cases, especially if we're talking about lo-fi beats, should be pretty simple. Even though mastering is pretty important, it isn't as important as having a good mix or a great beat overall. But it's definitely something you want to keep in your mind when making a beat. Now let's talk about plugins. The first plugin is the Yulin Loudness Meter 2. It's a great plugin that shows the loudness and LUFS of your song. I will talk about LUFS later on in this video. Sometimes I also use span for overall frequency analysis, but I mostly use it for more complex songs. The plugins for the mastering itself are pretty simple. EQ, compression and limiter will do the work. I personally use Ozu 9 just because it saves me time, but the plugins I mentioned before will do the same work. So now let's jump into the FL Studio. Remember that the mastering is the last part of the beat making process, so before you do that, make sure your mix sounds well. I made a video on that if you're interested in this topic. Once I'm ready, I select all my sounds from the mixer and I lower them in volume so that the overall loudness is somewhere around -6 dB. The reason for why I do this is to create headroom for making my track louder. When the overall loudness is around -6 dB, I open up EQ and cut the lowest sub, which potentially creates some muddiness, and I also boost high slightly. I would usually avoid the EQ step since it doesn't really affect your final product. Also, I would do this part in the mixing process because you have way more control over each sound. But if you feel that your beat needs some EQ, keep in mind to not cut or add too much frequencies. Then we go with the limiter and compression. But before that, you need to know what LUFS is. And I won't go into details since there's a lot of videos on this topic, but I want to give you an understanding of what we are trying to achieve. Basically, the more LUFS have, the louder and more compressed your song is. It's important when preparing your songs for the streaming platforms that usually require from -12 to -14 LUFS and -1 dB. So that's what we will try to achieve. Firstly, let's set the ceiling to -1 dB. This prevents from our song being louder than 1 dB. The next step is compression. I set the ratio to 1.4 to 1 and I lower the threshold. What will happen is that once the song is louder than the threshold, for example by 1.4 decibel over the threshold, the song will compress it to 1 dB. Now once I compress my beat, I raise the gain to make it louder. Meanwhile, I track the LUFS in the Yulin loudness meter, and once I hit the loudness of -1 dB and the LUFS between -12 and -14 LUFS, I'm finished with the mastering. So as you can see, the mastering process of lo-fi beats is quite simple. I'm aware there's a lot of philosophies on how to master music, but I believe that the most important part is in the mixing process. The mastering is only to prepare your track for streaming platforms, and therefore it won't fix your mix. And it's definitely not the most important part of the beat making, which many people believe. If you don't feel confident with your mixes, then I would advise you not to master yet, since it's more important to have a good mix than a good mastering. If you like this video, consider subscribing and leaving a like, since videos like this take time to make. If you have any questions or ideas for the future videos, let me know in the comments. See you next time.